Here are a few questions that you need to be prepared to address in any interview, especially that initial interview. First of all, who are you? Tell me a little bit about yourself. They're also going to ask you about your strengths and your weaknesses. Now, that may be masked with questions like, tell me what you're really good at. What's the one thing that you struggle with? What's the one thing that you would like to improve? These are different ways of asking about that weakness question or that strength question. Tell me what you're really good at. The other thing you need to be prepared to address is gaps in your resume. It might be the case that they ask you about things that you would have liked to have done, or what's your 5-year plan, or where do you see yourself in 5 years. You may also find yourself in that interview where they ask a question and you're not sure what they are asking. So let's walk through each one of those. When they ask you at the beginning of the interview, tell me a little bit about yourself. This is not the time to take them from where you were born and where you're from and what you did when you were a little kid, unless it's relevant. It might be the case that you are looking for a job in sports entertainment and you say, ever since I was a young child at 4 or 5, I was competing in sports. So my love for sports only grew over time. And then I became interested in the business of sports after I became a teenager and went on to college. So in that case, competing at the age of 4 or 5 might be relevant to the story. But most people make the mistake in the very first question of the interview because they don't focus on selling themselves when someone says, tell me about yourself. How should you be selling yourself? Well, when you walk into that interview, you ought to know the key success factors for the job that you are interviewing for. For example, if it's a financial services job, your analytical and your quantitative skills are going to be key. If you're interviewing for a journalist job, your ability to write, to be creative, to engage with people and build relationships so they tell you things they don't tell other people, all of that's going to be important. So when you are describing yourself in that first question, you want to come from that angle. So for example, as someone who was interviewing for an investment banking job, I said, well, I am a sophomore in college. I'm an economics concentrator, and the reason why I decided to focus on economics is I love all things analytical and quantitative. And outside of being a math concentrator, this was a discipline that I knew would involve numbers, would involve analysis, would really require me to think and to think deeply about what the numbers and the data would say and how that might impact economic policy. So now I've told you that I'm a sophomore. I told you why I made those decisions, and they were all about analysis and all those things quantitative. So when you're telling your story, make sure that you're weaving in some of those things that are required for you to be successful in the job. The other question, tell me a little bit about your strengths. Obviously, you want your strengths to be consistent with those things that they value in the job. So going back to our example of being a financial services professional or being an analyst, tell me about your strengths. I'm very analytical. I'm very good with numbers, and I'm great with respect to building relationships. Never met a stranger in my life. What do you have to do to be successful as an investment banker? You better be strong analytically. You better know how to read through the numbers, and you need to be very good at building relationships with people. All of those are key success factors, and they happen to be true about who I am. You never want to give people strengths that are not, in fact, your strengths, because they may ask you, give me an example of how quantitative you are. Give me an example of when you've used your analytical skills. And if you don't have great examples at the ready, then you're going to expose yourself for not being honest. And you always want to be honest in the interview, because you want them to make the honest decision to bring you in, and you want to make sure you're making the honest decision about choosing that organization to join. Because if you're being inauthentic at that time, it's not going to play well if you sell something that you're not once you get into that environment, because the buyer is buying what is in front of him or her at that time. The third question you need to be prepared for is, what is your weakness? It should go without saying, but I'm going to say it. Do not articulate a weakness that is consistent with something that they view to be important. So for example, if you are interviewing for a journalist job and they say, well, tell me about your weakness, or what's the one thing you need to improve? Don't say, I need to bone up on my writing skills. Absolutely not. Don't say, I need to be a tad more creative, because I'm very black and white. I focus just on what is right in front of me. So when you think about weaknesses, think about things that you might want to improve. Maybe it's public speaking. Maybe it happens to be something that you're pursuing athletically. Oh, I'd like to improve on my golf game. Or I'd like to improve my leadership skills. I'm strong now, but I'd like to be even stronger. I'd like to get really good at soliciting other people to participate in a collaboration. I'm good at it now, but I'd like to be even better. So something that you're working to improve, that's how you think about answering that question. And don't say, well, I can't think of any weaknesses. We all have them. And if you say, I can't think of any weaknesses right now you're communicating that perhaps you are not self-aware. And nobody wants to hire someone who is not self-aware. You may also get the question, there seems to be some gaps in your resume. You know, I see it stopped at 18 and then it picked up again here in 2021. What happened in those 3 years? Be honest about it. In those 3 years, you know, I had a forced sabbatical, if you will, after the job ended in 2018. And while I looked around for a few things, I wanted to be very careful about the opportunity that I took next. I wanted to make sure that it would allow me to build my skill set, either my intellectual tool chest or my experiential tool chest. But be honest about the gap, and then talk about what happened when you resumed your employment in 2021. That's the easiest way to cut off that line of questioning, because if the interviewer senses that you're going all around, or that you're hiding something, or that you're uncomfortable talking about something, all you're going to do is to invite them to ask you more about that thing. You may also get the question, where would you like to see yourself in 5 years? Obviously, the answer to that question is moving higher within the organization that you're interviewing for at that point. Nobody wants to think of themselves as a stepping stone to something. You want to make sure that you say, in 5 years, after I have fully prosecuted the opportunity that I hope you give me on the other side of this interview, I would imagine that I would continue to move up within the organization, leveraging each position that I have to bring greater contribution to the organization. So if that means in 5 years, as I'm starting out as an associate, in 5 years, I have the opportunity to be a vice president or an executive director, that's where I would expect to see myself in the next 5 years. Now, as important as the questions they are asking you in the initial interview, at the end of that interview, they're going to say, do you have any questions for me? And you must have questions for them. If you do not have any questions, it communicates the following: that you're not prepared, or that you are deathly afraid of this whole process and you're nervous, or number 3, that you didn't care enough to really find out whether or not this is the right organization and it's the right culture for you. Either way, that does not bode well for you, because if the interviewer thinks you didn't care enough to do the research, or you are scared to death, or you're just not prepared, there's no reason to hire you. But if you have great questions like, describe the culture of this organization in 3 words. If there was one thing that you can improve about the culture of the organization, what would it look like? When did you all start your DE&I journey, and where do you think you are right now? What are the 2 most important challenges facing the company or facing the organization right now? If you had to think about a superstar in this organization, how would you describe that person in 3 words? Give me 3 adjectives. If you had to describe the people that don't do well, that actually wipe out, or that you fired, give me the profile of what that person looks like. Now they know that you're thinking, that you care, that you're really trying to examine the organization and do your own due diligence as to whether or not this is a great fit for you. Remember, whenever somebody is sitting in front of you and they're interviewing you, they're assessing 3 things: your can-do, your will-do, and your fit. Your can-do they're really spending a lot of time in the first interview trying to figure that out. The can-do is where they figure out whether or not you have the skills, the experience, the smarts to actually do that job. The will-do, they're trying to figure out, are you self-motivated? Do you have a lot of initiative? Or must you be told every single thing to do, and you won't do it unless you were told to do it? You're not thinking for yourself. Do you have a great attitude about doing your work? Are you as equally motivated by doing the little things as you are about doing the big things, the things that are high profile? Because obviously they want to hire somebody who is as excited about the little things as they are about the things that are going to put them in the spotlight. And the last thing, the fit, is can they see you as somebody in that organization? Would they want to ride on a plane with you side by side for the next 8 hours? Are you going to be comfortable representing your organization out in the marketplace among prospective clients? These are the things that the interviewer is trying to figure out when they're sitting in front of you. The last thing I'm going to tell you is remember, whenever you're going into an interview situation, you have the upper hand. Why? The person on the other side of that table, they're the one that has a job to do that day. They are being tasked with bringing back great candidates for their organization. They're the one that has the pressure in picking the right people to join the organization. You have one job. That's to make sure that that person feels after 30 minutes that they would be making a mistake if they don't choose you. Go get them.